Jeff? Everything good? All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming out for this meeting, this public meeting for Sewell to give their presentation on this traffic infrastructure study. So before I hand it off to them, I just kind of want to give a brief recap on how we got to here. So the Village Partnership Initiative Task Force group, they met in around 2022, fall of 2022, to come up with a letter of intent to pursue a grant with MDOT. We were awarded the grant, and then we were allowed to enter into a request for proposal process, of which Sewell applied to, and another company, I think two other companies. And then there was a review process, and Sewell was selected based on their criteria. If any of you haven't read it yet, and if you are interested in reading any of that material, it is online under the project page for traffic infrastructure study. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sewell, and they're going to take it from here. So thank you.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here. I'm Diane Morabito. I am Vice President of Traffic Engineering at Sewell, and with me also is
Noah Boisvert. I work with Diane at Sewell.
My name is Brett Hart, engineer at Sewell Company as well.
My name's Eamon Hutton. I do not work at Sewell. I'm the one outlier here. I am from a firm called Viewshed, and I'm a landscape architect.
So this is our second public meeting on the transportation infrastructure study. Our first meeting was back last May, where we basically solicited your input on the areas of concern and the needs that you had regarding transportation infrastructure. Our agenda, go to the next one if you want. Our agenda here will be to talk about the first survey results, because in addition to the first public meeting, we also had a survey online where we received a bunch of responses, so we will talk about those responses and what we found. We will talk a little bit about the existing conditions analysis results. We did a lot of traffic analysis work and parking studies and things of that sort. And then we will go on to our recommended cross-sections for the study corridors and also the associated concept plans. And most importantly, public input. We want to see what you think about these plans and ideas. So first, I'd like to recognize the task force. They've been working for over a year, and they've done a lot of work. We've met 7 times with them individually as a group. There's 2 public meetings, and obviously they've worked a lot more than that. They've guided us and directed us all the way. So I would just like to recognize them and thank them for their efforts. The study area, just as a refresher, it includes Pascal Avenue, starting at Route 1, going through to Main Street, along Central Street, and up a portion of Union Street, basically encompassing the downtown area. It also includes West Street and then Route 90 out to the schools and out to Keelson Drive. We also extended that to look a little bit at Franklin Street and Church Street, that loop, and also looked at Mechanic Street and Winter Street. And I will let Eamon talk about the website results.
Yeah, so we've had 2 avenues for gathering your feedback so far. A meeting a lot like this last May was the first, and that was followed right away by an online survey. We had 54 total responses to the online survey, which was open from May until earlier this year in January. Oh, not close enough. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so just to recap, we've had 1 public meeting so far and an online survey that was open for the second half of last year. We go to the next page. So the survey had just a few questions. The first asked about your needs, and it was an open-ended question where you could write in your own response. And this takes all of those 54 responses and aggregates them. Where there were very similar comments, they're combined, and where they're totally unique, they're left alone. So you see the most common response all the way on the left end and the least common to the right. We'll go into the top 5. You can see there's a real set of front runners here. But if we sort them by theme, blue represents non-motorized travel, so comments that had to do with pedestrian and bike connectivity. Green had to do with vehicular travel, like lane widths and parking. Pink had to do with safety or concerns around safety, and orange were other comments. So if we go to the next one, these are the top 5. So leading the pack was the concern that there are not enough bike lanes or safe places to walk. The second was issues around speeding, followed by no safe way to walk to and from the school and to bike to and from the school. Fourth place was inadequate crosswalks, followed by parking in the downtown area. So these are the top 5 concerns or issues, needs that were expressed by folks responding to the online survey. Just a little color here to see some of the specific comments. We can leave it up for a moment, but related to not enough places to bike or walk, there was a comment that said, we really need a multi-use path. It's desperately needed to and from the school. The comment that vehicles are often traveling too fast in the village core, that there need to be sidewalks along Route 90, that there are no sidewalks or crosswalks to get across Route 1, and not enough parking here at the library or at the Opera House. Then the second half of the survey asked specific questions to particular areas in town. So on the left, the village area. In the center, we have Pascal Ave. And on the right, we're showing the key map of West Street and Route 90 from the school all the way down to Pascal. And then at the bottom, you were given a set of choices. What's the most important issue in this area? And across all 3, in blue, people indicated the most important issue was the need for pedestrian sidewalks and crossings. In the village area, that was followed by parking, bicycle lanes, and vehicle travel. The order switched a bit on Pascal, where instead of parking being a high priority, that dropped way down to the bottom, and it goes pedestrian sidewalks and crossings, bicycle lanes, followed by vehicle travel. And then along West Street, parking wasn't really an option that was offered. Instead, the most important issue was pedestrian sidewalks and crossings, followed closely by bike lanes, and then vehicle travel trailing in third place. All right, take it away, Diane.
Back to me. So we did do a lot of traffic data collection and survey information. And I just wanted to touch briefly on those because it does impact how we got to our recommendations. So in terms of safety, there were no high crash locations within this study area, and there were also no locations approaching that high crash area. So we had no real accident crash location issues. We did do capacity analysis of key intersections. Those key intersections that we did AM and PM counts under peak summer conditions included the signalized intersection of Route 1 and West Street and Route 90. We also looked at the unsignalized intersections of Route 1 and Pascal, Pascal and West, Pascal and Main, and Central, Russell, and Union. And what we found when we did capacity analysis for both 2023 existing conditions and 2045 projected conditions, there was only one capacity constraint that was identified, and that was the intersection of Route 1 and Pascal, where during the PM peak hour, not the AM, movements exiting Pascal currently operate at level surface F with long delays. And under 2045 conditions, those delays will become really extensive. So at some point, the town should be planning for some sort of an improvement project there, be it a traffic signal or a roundabout. You know, a roundabout might make a really nice gateway into the community, but it takes a lot more right-of-way that I don't believe you necessarily have there, so it might take some property takings. And also a roundabout is much more expensive than a traffic signal. But at some point in the future, prior to 2045, you're definitely going to need to do something at that intersection. We also did speed studies, given all the speed concerns we heard at the first meeting. We did time and delay runs of all the study corridors, and the police also deployed speed feedback signs for us, and that gave us a lot more speed data. There were speeding concerns that we identified on both Route 90 and Pascal. In both cases, the 85th percentile speed, which is where 85% of the traffic travels at or below, was greater than 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. Basically, they both ran about 8 miles over. So that meant 85% of the people were going about 8 miles over the speed limit. To Typically, we see those 3, 4, 5 miles over the speed limit. So when it gets to be that much, indeed, there is some significant speeding going on, which is something that was reported, by the survey and by the task force and by the first public meeting. So our recommendations are things that will try to calm those speeds and slow traffic on those corridors. We didn't find, based upon the runs that we did, any significant speeding issues on Main Street, Central Street, or West Streets. But these were done under summer conditions, and that may be a different situation in winter. But in the summer, it's more congested. We also did do a parking study one afternoon in August. There are approximately 198 spaces in the downtown area and in fairly close proximity. 171 of those spaces were used during the peak usage period. The spaces closest to downtown were most utilized, as you would expect, with lesser usage on the outskirts. All of the spaces in Marine Park were full. The lot on High Street at Kramer Park, the lot at Main and Central, and all of the spaces on Central Street were fully utilized at the time of this study. So that does show that there is some more demand for parking. The spaces that were vacant were like out on Lime Rock Street or back on Pascal. They weren't very close to downtown at all. So based upon all of this, we've made some recommendations for what these roadway sections should look like in the future, with the idea of traffic calming on some of these facilities. So the first one is Route 90. And again, this is to provide for students going to and from school. Most of Route 90 has a fairly wide right-of-way. So what we're recommending is first that it be restriped with 11-foot lanes instead of 12-foot lanes, which might help to slow travel speeds a little bit. Right now, it's 12-foot travel lanes, which is wider than it needs to be. And then that a 10-foot multi-use trail is constructed along the side with an esplanade separating it from Route 90 that would provide for both bicycles and pedestrians to get to and from the schools.
Just so everyone's, sorry, I'm just going to say, just so everyone's clear, the bottom panel represents the depiction of existing conditions. So what we're suggesting would be on the top portion. That's consistent with all the forthcoming slides as well.
Right. The next one is Route 90. When we get near Route 1, at this point we have less right-of-way, so we may need to get that path down to 8 feet, which is basically a bare minimum. We're going to try to get it to be 10 feet, but the right-of-way in that short stretch between Route 1 and the 4 homes that are there is a little bit narrower, so we may not be able to get a full 10 feet, and at that location, it would be curbside. There isn't room for an esplanade. So that short stretch near Route 1, this trail would be curbside instead of separated by an esplanade. Pascal Avenue, the section that goes from Route 1 to West Street, currently is already 30 feet wide. It's 29 to 30 feet the entire length. And there's a 5-foot existing sidewalk that generally is in pretty good condition. So this allows us to restripe that portion of Pascal to provide 2 narrower 10-foot travel lanes, which is fairly narrow, and that should slow your traffic speeds. And then we would restripe the shoulders for bike lanes and provide bike lane markings so that that also becomes, the driver sees the bike lane markings and also will slow, recognizing that there may be bikes out there. So that's a very low-cost improvement that can be done with very little money except for restriping and bike lane markings to create that section along Pascal. When we get around West Street, there's quite a bit of on-street parking occurring, and you do have a bit of a village area there, and there are some apartments that use on-street parking as well as a shop. So we would recommend here that we use the right-of-way to create some 8-foot parking pockets, some formal parking pockets. I would recommend the travel lane get a little bit wider to 11 feet because we'll have car doors. So instead of quite 10 feet is quite narrow. You don't want car doors opening into bicycles or whatever. So, and this section would be marked with sharrows. So instead of bike lane markings here, you would have sharrows, which is a marking that's used in the travel lane to show that you should expect bicycles. and that bicycles have the full right to use that lane as much as you do. So this section, and this was the same thing we're recommending downtown because you don't have width to add bike lanes, is that this section be marked with sharrows. When we get to the downtown section, from Bridge to Main Street, basically, or the Main Street section, the committee felt strongly from the very start that there should be sidewalks on both sides, and we've been meeting with MDOT as well to convey to them that it's important that the new bridge have sidewalk on both sides. So this section is proposing pretty much what you have now, which is a pretty wide travel lane because of the curve, and you have the high elevated sidewalk on one side, so you need some offset from that, but that we add a 5-foot sidewalk on the hotel side where there is no sidewalk now to connect towards Marine Park. And that will require a retaining wall because there's a steep slope there. If we look at the downtown section, again, this is very constrained. Right now you have 8-foot parking lanes both sides, 11-foot travel lanes, which we're recommending no change to. But we are recommending a sidewalk on the opposite side from the hotel. And this will also require a retaining wall because there's a steep slope. There's a couple of telephone poles and this tight right-of-way there. But currently, people who park on that side have no place for their passengers to get out. There is no place to safely cross. They're dumped in the middle of the road instead of at a crosswalk. So we feel it's really important for a downtown that you have sidewalks on both sides. So that is proposed to be added there, and the rest of it pretty much stays the same. But there is a short section by the park where there is a 5-foot sidewalk, but this would be extending it up towards the Opera House to that first driveway. And we'll show all this on plans in a minute. The next one is West Street, and this because originally we had proposed the 10-foot travel lanes to keep speed slow, residential street, and we had proposed bike lanes and the 5-foot existing sidewalk, but the committee felt that since we have a 10-foot multi-use trail up by the school, let's just provide a 10-foot multi-use trail along West Street as well, so that both bikes and pedestrians can use that trail. So here, again, we're proposing 10-foot narrow travel lanes to keep speeds low, a 10-foot multi-use trail. And then when we get to the RES site, it's pretty much the same section, except we're proposing some on-street parking there. We have more right-of-way there at the RES site, and the multi-use trail might actually, meander in and around the park a bit. It may not be exactly curbside, but there's some room there to add some extra on-street parking for the RES site. That's it.
Yeah, so I'll continue on where Diane left off. So this is a plan view representation, so an aerial or a view that basically shows this perspective of the cross sections that we were just reviewing. So this is Route 90. It's cut off a little bit on the left, but it does anticipate the multi-use path extending to Keelson, the school drive. And it showed the green stripe represents what would be the grass esplanade between the highway and the 10-foot multi-use path. It does show the slight narrowing of the striping on Route 90 from the current 12-foot lanes to 11-foot lanes, and then the adjustment in the effectively the paint stripe, the shoulder width from 8 feet to 9 feet. So with the attempt, narrowing lanes with the attempt to try to slow traffic down. There are, on the right side of the slide, there are a couple alternate paths. Well, one shows completely an alternate path to the elementary school. That's just something to consider to provide additional connectivity to that school. And then continuation of the multi-use path, primarily with an esplanade. There is a bit of right-of-way constraint there close to the intersection of Cross Street, where we'd likely have the multi-use path, a curb section, basically no esplanade there, just for right-of-way constraints. That house is very close to the road with some fairly large trees right there. So an alternate to that multi-use path alignment could be a path that goes down Cross Street and crosses over that existing field over to the elementary school. Obviously, that's private property. So it's, it would have to be an easement or a taking or something like that. But we just felt it was a good option to show that that may be a preferred option, provided that the landowner was amenable to it. And this is where the section that Diane mentioned, as you get close to the intersection of Route 1, the right-of-way becomes fairly constrained, particularly on the north side of Route 90. So this section, multi-use path, we've got it labeled 8 to 10 feet. Diane mentioned 8 feet would be the bare minimum you would ever want to do a multi-use path. But that would be, preferably it would be 10, but that section would be directly on a curb, so there'd be no esplanade as you approach that intersection. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, at the bottom pane, the intersection itself, there's an existing crosswalk that crosses Route 1 from the res site. What we would propose is there would be another crosswalk that heads north to the other side of Route 190 to provide connectivity to that multi-use path. And there'd be an ADA accessible ramp with detectable warnings on that side of the intersection as well.
And another thing that we talked about at that intersection also is providing exclusive pedestrian phasing, because obviously Route 1 is very difficult to cross. So we would propose to DOT that this become an exclusive pedestrian phase, so that when a pedestrian pushes the button to cross Route 1, all traffic stops. So they're not going concurrent with the traffic moving on the same side as them, but all traffic is stopping to let those pedestrians cross. So that is what we would recommend for that intersection.
Yep. Okay, so the next slide depicts West Street. This is adjacent to the res site, where we're suggesting 10-foot lanes and parking, 8-foot parking along the park side of the facility with a 10-foot multi-use path adjacent to that. That's still in flux and could change, but that pathway could weave through the park. There could be a bunch of amenities and things like that. But as a suggestion, this would be the starting point, and then that multi-use path would continue with two 10-foot lanes, a 2-foot gravel shoulder or a 2-foot shoulder on the north side, and a 10-foot multi-use path directly on the curb on the south side of West Street as you approach Pascal. And so this is depicting, top pane is the intersection of Route 1 and Pascal. Effectively the same footprint that you've already got. It's effectively a restriping project. So you would have 10-foot lanes. Again, that's narrowing the travel lanes. 10 feet is fairly narrow. In fact, DOT wouldn't let you go any narrower than that. So that would be the bare minimum, which should calm traffic down to a certain extent. And then it's a little hard to see, but if you see the little white symbols effectively in the shoulder, that would be the formal bikeway, the bike travel lane. So it would be 4.5 to 5 feet in width. Again, within the limits of existing pavement, so it's going to vary a little bit. But you have the pavement width to accommodate this cross section all the way up to West Street, which is great.
And there's a crosswalk proposed.
Crosswalk, yep, sorry.
Proposed at School Street. There's not one there now, and it's approximately 400 feet from the one at Route 1. So we would propose a crosswalk there. And all of these crosswalks on Pascal, we're recommending that they be equipped with the rectangular rapid flash beacons, so that push the buttons and you get the visibility. Actually, can you go really quick? Where's that?
It's tense.
Just to,
You're getting a sneak preview of
yeah.
the rest of the slides.
So that those pedestrian big flashing signs that they can push the button to make it really clear that somebody's crossing that crosswalk. And they really increase visibility, and they really reduce accidents at crosswalks.
And they're solar powered, which is
They're solar powered,
great.
and they're pretty inexpensive. They're about $15,000 in installation, but DOT's had a program lately where they get them at a bulk cost and sell them to towns for their cost, which even reduces it to less than that.
So continuing on Pascal towards West Street, this is where you start to see, as you go to the east of West Street, you start to see the parking pockets with anticipated bump outs to provide a kind of a formal pocket for that parking. The 5-foot sidewalk is effectively what you have now, but it would be directly on a curbed adjacent to the 8-foot parking stalls, maintaining, that's 11-foot travel lanes through there.
Correct.
And you can see the Shero symbols that Diane had mentioned. So those are kind of like a bike symbol with two chevron arrows in front of it that, again, it gives reinforcement to the driver that, hey, there's more than cars and trucks on this road. You need to share the lanes with bicycles. So crosswalk. Sorry about that. So let's see, crosswalk at Pine Street. I know from the last public meeting there was discussions and a kind of a desire to have a crosswalk at Ship Street as well. Unfortunately, there's rules on how closely you can space crosswalks, and DOT's fairly firm on that. Not fairly firm.
Very
They are
firm.
firm on that. And those two streets are close together. So what we've done is provided the crosswalk at Pine Street and Harborview across the way, and then are suggesting a sidewalk heading back southwest to provide connectivity to Ship Street. So while the crosswalk wouldn't be directly at Ship Street, you would still have formal pedestrian connectivity there.
You'd have a sidewalk to get you from Ship Street to the crossing.
Continuing on, Pascal towards the bridge. Nothing to elaborate here. The Sheros continue on, lane widths continue on. Sidewalk is pretty much where it is right now, where the large retaining wall is as you approach the Marine Park entrance.
Yeah, one thing that have not yet looked at is that the Marine Park entrance has been a concern to a lot of people. And one thing we've wanted to look at is the town-owned parcel, basically beside Harborview. But we're waiting on survey for that, which we expect to have within a few weeks before we really look at what we can do with that to possibly reconfigure the Marine Park entrance or not. So that hasn't been decided yet because we don't have the information yet. Just didn't want to gloss over Marine Park.
Yep.
We still have to look at it. Okay.
If you can flip ahead there, Noah. There we go. So the top panel is continuing on Pascal at the intersection of High Street. What this depicts here is, I'll start with the bridge. So the bridge shows sidewalk on both sides. It's been very important to the committee, very important from the public comments that have been received, and that's been conveyed to DOT in some DOT meetings. They've been fairly receptive and basically said we'll do everything they can to make that happen, with no guarantees, but that's what they're telling us, so that's good news. But what they have suggested is that the more connectivity that can be shown to the adding a southerly sidewalk to the bridge, the better justification they have to go through the expense of adding that. So what we've done is extended that sidewalk down to the existing park entrance, provided a formal crosswalk across Pascal just before you get to High Street. Of course, crosswalk crossing High Street as well. And if you see I don't know what color that is, peach hatch there on High Street, that is anticipated to be a flush concrete. So it's a visual, cars will tend to stay off it, but it will allow larger trucks to drive on it if they need to. So the attempt there is to try to formalize kind of 90-degree up that intersection a little bit more than it is now, and try to make it so cars don't crowd that side where there's limited sight distance. It's kind of hard to see past that retaining wall there. So
Would still let the boats and trailers turn around if they had to, but
the full width is still there, but the visual inclination, especially for passenger cars and trucks, would be to stay off that area and keep on a narrower section of High Street. So 2 sidewalks, one on each side of the bridge, extending across to downtown, where there currently is the stairs leading up to the sidewalk on the north side. We are showing a formal ADA ramp, so it'd be kind of a switchback ramp. There's a little bit of work and survey that would need to be done to make sure that's actually feasible and ADA compliant. But we are depicting that, noting that it's, from an ADA perspective, that would be a very important feature to have that crosswalk lead to an accessible way to get onto that sidewalk. Let's see, on the southern, on the lower pane there on Main Street, we do show the formal, where there's existing parking here, we anticipate maintaining it with 6 formal parking spots, a crosswalk crossing Main Street. Do you want to touch upon Franklin now, or?
Yeah, we can. So Franklin Street, we had originally looked at, there was talk of trying to put parking there. We went out and field reviewed it. It's very narrow. It's like 16 feet wide. And if we were to put parking there, you would want a sidewalk there as well to collect those pedestrians. And it just didn't seem feasible with the width. And because the width is so narrow, it's really not safe technically for two-way travel. So what we were recommending is that it be a one-way loop up Franklin and out Church, just because it is narrow now. I know when I was driving it this winter, as I get to the top of the hill, wouldn't have wanted a car to be coming around down the hill at me. But that's just our recommendation as a way to make it safer. And we had also heard from people and confirmed in the field that there is a sight distance restriction if you're trying to pull out of Franklin Street because of that building block to the right and parked cars. You really don't have adequate sight distance. So this is primarily just for safety reasons, that because you don't have good sight lines and you don't really have great pavement widths, that it would be better served as a one-way. But it wouldn't be providing any extra parking or anything of that sort. It would just be one-way traffic flow.
We can go to the next one, Noah. All right, so the top pane is Central Street. I think the important thing to show here is while there already is parking on both sides of the road, the issue with on the north side of Central Street, there's no place for pedestrians to go once they park there other than to just cross the road, which is not a particularly safe thing to do. So we're proposing a sidewalk, 5-foot sidewalk directly adjacent to the parallel parking. There are right-of-way constraints there. There's grade constraints there. It's a very steep hill. So that if you recall, the cross-section does show a retaining wall there. That's one option. Again, there's property issues here that would have to be contended with. But that would be our recommendation for pedestrian safety. Crosswalk stays in its current location, crossing Central Street. Parking striping would be modified a little bit to provide the appropriate offset from the crosswalk to the first parking stall, but effectively maintaining all the parking that you already have on Central Street. The bottom pane extends up Union Street and shows the library where we're sitting, but the multi-use path would be directly on Union Street, directly adjacent to the curbing. We label this as 8 to 10 feet, realizing that there are it's a very tight right-of-way in this location. Again, property concerns. You may need to go down to 8 feet, and there may be, in the design process, may have to get into some property. It would have to address property concerns.
And it's also matching an 8-foot multi-use trail. So this is extending up to the existing multi-use trail, which is only 8 feet. So it doesn't necessarily need to be wider for that short distance if it's connecting to an 8-foot trail.
But to provide connectivity to that,
Right.
This was, we felt was an important component of the planning. And this was, although slightly outside of our of the study area, we had talked about this and reviewed it while we were in the field. And in order to provide additional parking, a suggestion we would have would be to make Mechanic Street one way off Russell Street. And that would then, and so that within effectively the existing pavement width, you could fit a one-way travel way, 8-foot parallel parking stalls, and a 5-foot sidewalk. That would both provide pedestrian connectivity, provide quite a few more parking spaces than what currently exists. It would change Mechanic into a one-way that would effectively turn into a loop that would come up Winter Street back onto Russell. So definitely some traffic changes there, but it certainly would provide for additional pedestrian connectivity and additional parking in the town for the downtown, or very close to the downtown.
Right. And it would be a low-cost option. That sidewalk, I believe, mostly exists, does it not? Yeah, the sidewalk and the curbing is there, so it's really mostly a striping project to create that parking. And in other terms of adding other parking, Viewshed is working on a plan for Kramer Park. We had talked about adding some parking pockets and some formalizing within the park to create some additional parking spaces in the park, and Viewshed is working that up at the moment. So that's another way we'll be looking for more parking in close proximity to downtown. I think that's it. So, yeah. So we're ready to take comments and questions. Yes?
Yeah, I have a suggestion, a wish.
Yep.
And that is, Jan Rosen, I really like a suggestion for bike lanes, that they be separated from traffic lanes by using raised reflectors that would pick up headlights, and also you would feel it with the tires of your car if you hit them. And that would be an additional safety thing, and I don't think it's going to cost an arm and a leg to do that.
Jim Chalfant, live in Rockport. I have a question regarding the one-way on Mechanic and then routing that traffic, making the loop up Winter Street. Okay, so Mechanic is a fairly straight street, about a 24-foot width. Winter Street has a 90-degree curve, and it's about 16 feet pavement. It's already difficult to get out onto that street because people come flying up there way too fast. And the idea of routing all of the traffic that now goes up Mechanic onto Winter Street, for me, would be absurd.
Yeah. It would be, I mean, there's two options for it. If indeed it's narrow, it could also become one-way. Could become a one-way loop. So, and that would cut your traffic volume in half. Typically, when you go to a one-way street, you reduce your traffic volume because you only have cars going in one direction instead of both. So an option would be, if it's narrow and you don't feel it's good for two-way traffic now, that could also become one-way out. How would you feel about that?
I still wouldn't like it.
You still wouldn't like
No,
it, okay.
I would not like it because, number one, people don't observe a realistic speed limit on it now.
Mm-hmm.
And if you route all of the traffic coming off Mechanic, it will simply be worse. I mean, I happen to live on that corner, and I back into my driveway and garage because I'm terrified. If I backed out, I'd have been hit 10 times already. And it does not give me a good feeling to think that the traffic on that would be even greater than it is now.
Yeah, I don't think it would be greater. It could indeed be the same or less if it became one-way, but
Well, I respectfully disagree with that.
I'm Bob Lawrence. I have a question and then a comment. Did you collect data on pedestrian usage in the village? Or did you just collect vehicular data?
when we did our traffic counts, we also recorded pedestrians. So we do have that information. But if they would record them where they crossed a street, it wouldn't record them just walking down a sidewalk.
Because I happen to live on the corner of Pleasant Street and Pascal, and the number of walkers who, from Ship Street as well as going in both directions on Pleasant, is far greater than on Pine Street. And I wonder why relocating the sidewalk crossing there would be of any additional benefit. It seems to me that would make it more challenging for people living on Ship Street to get down and over and then doubling back, as opposed to going straight across and up Pleasant Street, which is a very popular walking route, up Pleasant to the cemetery, then down Howe Street and back on Pascal.
We can look at that. We put it there to keep it close to Ship because there were complaints there. and to get Ship Street to a crosswalk in close proximity, and to kind of space them out approximately 400 feet apart so that we could have a lot more crosswalks than exist now. But we can look at keeping it at Pleasant. That's what you think is better?
If I could have people who are using the microphone, if you just hold it right up here, it is directional, so over here it's like ignoring you.
I'm a ham radio operator, so I know all about that stuff. Phil Godet, I live across the street from Bob on the corner of Ship Street in Pascal. And yeah, I'm concerned. I mean, I guess maybe I didn't really understand. Are you planning to put a sidewalk on the east side of Pascal so we can get to Pine Street?
Yes, there's a sidewalk
So-
proposed on that short piece between Ship and Pine.
Right? And
Yes.
then it goes all the way down to Rare, to the
Well, then,
to
at
West
that
Street?
point, you cross to the existing sidewalk on Pascal.
Right, but the sidewalk will go from West Street all the way up to Pine Street on the east side of Pascal? Is that correct?
No.
Just Ship Street to Harborview,
Okay,
just that short section.
okay, and then there's a crosswalk down at West Street also.
Yes.
Okay, so for us to come across the street to get our mail, we have to go down to Pine Street and come back. Our mailboxes are all on the opposite side of Pascal, so
Yeah, I
there's
mean,
a whole bunch of mailboxes over there. So a lot of people go back and forth across at our corner to get their mail from the east side of the street.
yeah, I'm just thinking, the Pleasant Street one, I don't believe meets the DOT criteria, so
We can double check that.
we'll definitely look at that.
So it's from West Street, so if you want a crosswalk at West Street, which we would recommend there be one there,
Yeah, especially with the multi-use trail, I think it's,
It's-
and the store there.
Yeah.
I think it's,
kind of a must. So then you've got, your DOT is firmly restricts how close you can put another crosswalk. So if Pleasant Street is within that zone, that they will not budge on that.
So it's 400 feet
yes,
minimum?
400 feet
between
minimum
crosswalk?
between crosswalks,
And that's true in the village as well?
yes. That's why you used to have, I believe you used to have one, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
I'm Linda Clancy. I am on the Pathways Committee, and you guys make me want to cry, really, seriously. I mean, this was a dream 25 years ago on the Comp Plan Committee. We were talking Esplanades then. Thank you, Richard Remsen. But the West Street, Route 90 to the school, you have just moved this community forward so far, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. It's beautiful. As a reporter, now I have a question for you, and that is, you had talked a little bit about the intersection of Route 1 and 90. Can you clarify that a little bit more and what you mean by all traffic stopping? I think.
yes, instead of most traffic signals in Maine, when you push a pedestrian button, you go concurrently. So the main street goes this way, and those walkers that are going that way go with it. But when you have an exclusive pedestrian phase, all traffic stops. So nobody moves, only pedestrians move.
All the lights will be red in
All
all
the lights would be
directions.
red and, yes,
So the Walmart trucks stop.
Everything stops.
stops. That's outstanding.
yeah,
I mean,
everything
you
would
have
stop.
really- You have done so much for this community with just one plan, so thank you.
Thank you.
But you would have to put up a no right on red, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, you typically,
Sorry.
when it's all red, yes, you would have a no right on red. You can have a blank out sign that basically just shows up when that pedestrian button is, and it would be a no right turn on red that lights up when the pedestrian button is lit.
Okay, yeah.
So you could maintain right on red when
The rest
when
of
the
the time.
pedestrian phase isn't active.
Yeah, because even that, the existing crosswalk, it's a pretty hairy crossing of the street because trucks will just come and make that right-hand turn.
Right, you have that right
So that
turn,
would be, okay,
and there
yeah, yeah.
isn't a blank out or a no right turn on red now. So, yeah, that would definitely improve that situation.
Could you cross diagonally?
Yeah, that's not.
I saw you.
Will you allow crossing in all directions then if it's all stopped?
I'm not sure DOT would allow that on Route 1. We recently did it on a project in downtown Belfast. In a downtown, I think they'll allow that. I'm not sure they'd allow it in that location. Yeah, I think the best thing to do, yeah, I don't know. We could look at that some more. I mean, it would make sense to just go diagonal if we did exclusive and not make them cross two legs. I'll look at that.
Can I ask? One more question. Is there any talk of speed limit decreases? Especially, you said there was an issue on 1.
On Pascal and Route 90.
Okay.
So Pascal, people have been asking for a 25-mile speed limit instead of the existing 30. We would recommend, once it gets restriped to those narrower lanes, that is when the town asks DOT to do a speed zone study and reduce it. When they do their studies, they often do look at the existing speed data, and once that's slowed down, they may be more inclined to reduce it if they see that cars aren't traveling that fast to begin with. In terms of Route 90, it's actually a mobility corridor, so I don't believe DOT would allow a speed limit change there, but I would like to just get cars going the speed limit there.
So there was no issue on 1? Or did you
We
not?
did not
Did it
study,
include?
we did not include Route 1 in the
Gotcha,
study
okay.
area, just the intersection.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
Emily. I'm a Rockport resident, and I'm also the operations manager at Aldemere Farm and Erickson Fields. So I have interest at both ends of this study. One question on this end is, did you consider extending sidewalks from the existing ones on Russell Ave to Chestnut by Aldemere Farm? Or bike lanes or what have you, but extending this study to between the two downtowns there.
Basically, our study area didn't include Russell. We had the intersection of
didn't,
Russell,
no.
but it did not include Russell.
Yeah, I would encourage that as a follow-up. And then on the 90 end of this study, I would be interested in talking to you about the possible access to the schools through that field and the constriction at that house across the street from Erickson. And also, did you consider a crosswalk at Erickson? Because a lot of kids go from the schools to programming at Erickson, as well as kids on the cross-country team running those trails that go all the way to Beach Hill.
Yeah, we didn't consider a crosswalk on Route 90, mostly because of the speeds. I think DOT allows them on 45 and under, but I can look at that some more. Again, this is
We would have to
our
check that,
preliminary
yeah.
recommendations, but I'd be a little hesitant, only that I know the speeds are greater than 45 there. So I'm not sure I'd want to encourage crossing.
It's 40.
To 45.
I-
Right, but
I would
the
highly
actual
encourage
speeds
looking at
are
that
greater than, the
possibility.
actual speeds that we were getting more like. Yeah. I don't, yeah. We will look at it.
Jenny here. I'm thoughtful about Route 1 going south to the intersection of Route 90. There's one lane there to turn right. Most people go into the overflow lane to turn right on red because the traffic gets backed up the hill a lot, especially in the summer. It's backed all the way to the top of the hill most times. I'm trying to picture that big truck turning right, and I want to understand a little bit more about this green area that you plan on putting on the right side of Route 90 as you turn off of Route 1, how that all fits. It's kind of a little confusing without somebody pointing on that chart up there for me to really get it.
Yeah, we're not proposing any changes to the lanes, although I have looked at that. So the existing lane use is southbound on Route 1.
So which is southbound? Okay. So if I'm going southbound and I'm going to turn right onto Route 90, there's a median strip. You can see that black tongue there. There's a median strip there. Most trucks go over that median strip. Yeah, they do. So the question was whether or not you were going to have a sidewalk on the north side of that Route 90.
There'd be a wide multi-use path.
So that's a continuation of that overflow trail, that overflow lane, that extra lane that comes down the hill on Route 1?
So there's this would be, if you're coming down the hill, there's the left turn lane that brings you here. There's the straight and right turn lane, and you're saying people go over the white line into that third space?
Oh, absolutely.
So
Most people.
This curb line is on the outside of that.
Yeah.
So
And the
all
multi-use
three
trail
of
is-
those southbound lanes are open.
So you're proposing taking a piece of land to the right of what's existing?
It's within the right-of-way. If you look at the dash line on that, the right-of-way is fairly wide, so it's not taking any property, it's within the existing Route 90 and Route 1 right-of-way.
Not to say there may not be a need for construction easement or grading easement. These are conceptual plans.
Well, what I was
So-
concerned about was pedestrians, really, with the big trucks turning there. I was just concerned about people,
Sure.
especially, I mean, that's like huge.
Well, again, that's where we're recommending, though, that anybody on that crosswalk, that when that's occurring, that no vehicles are moving, so that that is safe, so that they get up on that multi-use curbed, raised, multi-use trail. So it's not at grade level, it is curbed and raised.
Oh, okay, that helps understand. Thank you.
Yeah. But I started to say also that we have looked at that intersection, and currently it is striped southbound as a left and a through right. It would function better. There are very few left turns now with the school gone there. It would function better if it was a through left and a right turn lane. But it would require a realignment of the whole intersection so that, because currently, right now, you have a northbound left opposite a southbound left. So it would have to be realigned in order to change those lane uses, but the intersection would function much better. So that's something we're looking at as well.
Thank you. I just have one more question. So I want to understand a little bit more about the transition between Mechanic Street and Russell, specifically because I walk that road quite a bit. And when we say there's a sidewalk there, right now you can walk the sidewalk, but in the summertime, almost all the vegetation covers the sidewalk until you get to that point where that telephone pole is and you have to turn left. And I think that might be, I don't know exactly where you're talking about there, but there's a huge ledge there, along the road on the left. It's very narrow, and it's a completely blind corner when you're walking. There's no way to cross over to the other side to get onto the ocean side of that section, which is where the sidewalk is, once you get to Mechanic Street. So the thing is, if you're proposing putting cars on the left side there, parking, I can't imagine how that would feel, like how that would walk with my dog and things like that. I just don't feel like there's enough space getting around that corner. Do you know what I'm talking about, where that little curve is?
Well, there wouldn't be parking right at the corner.
Yeah.
There would just be sidewalk, and it would become one-way instead of two-way. So you'd actually probably have more room.
Which part's one way? To where?
It would be one-way from Russell to Winter.
So
And-
in that case, I would be going around that corner. On the sidewalk.
On a sidewalk, right?
The existing sidewalk, right?
Right, correct?
Okay.
Yep.
I wasn't sure exactly where that transition was going to be there. The visual of it wasn't working, so.
Yeah. it's-
I just want to put a vote in for that corner because our daughter was pushing a baby carriage up that hill and there's a big ledge there as you come around the corner. And she had a dog, and the dog jumped out into the street, and there was a school bus came flying around the corner coming in towards the village. It was almost a disaster. It's only about half wide enough for a real person to walk there. You
Right.
can't even
So
walk to.
yeah, we would propose that it be a full 5-foot sidewalk, so maybe the sidewalk there needs to be widened. And if there's vegetation
Definitely.
there, it certainly should be
Definitely.
cleared.
But
Yeah.
the traffic speed was, the other half of the problem too, coming down that hill. A lot of people speed
Mhm.
there, so.
Yeah,
Do you want to ask a follow-up
yeah, do
question
you
real
want
quick?
to, you can go up.
Well, I'm just confused about where Phil is talking about the ledge. Are you on Russell then?
Yes.
I think that's what's going on.
Are we
It's
talking
a transition
here?
on the sidewalk on Russell.
Okay.
So this is Mechanic here and Russell here. Is this the corner where?
No, don't,
To the right. To the right.
Oh, here.
We're talking about just taking a left past the pier.
No.
No.
Way up there.
Yeah, up here, because the sidewalk's like this big and then the trees.
okay, yeah.
And there's no crosswalk.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's beyond where we studied, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's beyond, yeah.
That's beyond the study area.
So there'll be no changes to that area, is what you're saying?
It was beyond the study area, so we did not study it and we proposed no changes there, but
That's right where Winter Street comes out. Why, is that not part of the study area? I'm confused.
well, nothing,
Technically, Mechanic, Winter, Russell, none of that area was in the study area. We just took it upon ourselves to include Mechanic as an option to provide more parking if it was deemed, advantageous.
I got it, but if you're considering, changes to Mechanic and Winter, that corner right there, which is opposite the exit of Winter, is where the issue is with the sidewalk. So, I mean,
Gotcha.
that's part of the whole problem right there.
I'm looking on Street View, you can see just what you're talking about, how narrow that
Mhm.
sidewalk is through there,
What is that?
and blind. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to piggyback on that and say that there's no crosswalk there where you make a right onto Mechanic, or if you continue on Russell. So the pedestrian sidewalk ends where Mechanic meets Russell. And then on the opposite side of the street, it picks up again, 30 feet, 30, 40 feet. And in between those two areas, there's nowhere as a pedestrian to safely cross. And then there's that blind curve coming from Aldermere Farm into the village where cars fly. And someone's walking a baby carriage with a dog and a bus comes. There's just nowhere safe to walk as a pedestrian or to even cross the road. And so I would suggest, or to get pedestrians to Aldermere Farm if they want to walk that distance. It's that just whole area. And, people walk that area. They do Beauchamp, they go by the golf course, and they come back around. And it's just not very pedestrian friendly, even though it's heavily pedestrian used. So that's my thought. And so it'd be nice to have a crosswalk and a wider sidewalk.
Okay, we'll go over here first.
This is just a follow-up to Emily's point back out on Route 90, across from the high school. And I understand that Route 90 is a mobility corridor, and it's very hard to discuss this with the DOT. But there is a housing development, Forest Glen, across the street from the high school, which a lot of kids live there. So it's always been a topic of discussion. How can we get people from the high school across? And from there was at one point a path that was to go from the end of Forest Glen over to Erickson so that people could, especially the cross-country skiers and bikers and so forth, from the high school. So that is still a valid concern of the community.
It's my understanding that actually the sidewalk is going to be Sorry, Jeff. It's my understanding the sidewalk is going to be continued, not right away, but from Doug Coles to Calderwood Lane, no further. Jonathan Duke told me that this summer. Well, that's not going to happen this year, but it is in the works, is what I was told. So that would be a big improvement. But going the whole way to the farm, maybe not. I have one other question. When I come down the hill from south and turn onto Pascal at night, I find that island sometimes really hard to see. And you know, if it's snowed or whatever, it's almost impossible to see. Is there some way to make that a little more visible? I mean, it may just be old eyes, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that has found that to be hard. Yeah, but it's pretty hard to see it.
So the island on Pascal at Route 1.
Yeah, as you're coming north on Route 1 and you turn onto Pascal, it's very hard to see that island, I find.
Yeah, I think ideally that whole intersection should be squared up a little bit more. And again, like I said, I think major improvements are going to be needed there, like a traffic signal installation and maybe dual lanes coming on the Pascal approach. So, yeah, something's going to need to be done there, and island reconfiguration is probably part of it.
Okay. If to get the kids across Route 90, we have, interstates, we have animal corridors all over the place. How about a tunnel? I know it's not cheap.
Yeah, not cheap.
Hello, thank you. I'm very appropriately named Walker for this
Okay,
study.
good.
I happen to live right across the street as well. Thank you for this. This is exciting stuff. I want to put a second motion in for the crosswalk at Erickson Field. I don't go to high school, but I do go to Erickson Field occasionally, and if the multi-use path is across the street from Erickson Field, it'd be nice to get across there. Second, I had a question about the Route 90, Route 1 intersection. If diagonal crosswalk would be awesome, can you do crosswalks on all four ways there? I know there's not a path on the opposite, but...
Yeah, there's nothing to connect to. DOT requires that you connect sidewalk to sidewalk. So unless you had sidewalks on both sides of West Street and sidewalks on the north side of Route 1, we could not do that.
Cool, got it. And last thing, did you look at, I remember the last time there was some discussion about, I don't know what they're called, moving the curbs in a little bit in the street to slow traffic, or even at this intersection here. I know we live across the street, and that stop sign becomes very optional when there's light traffic in the village. And people do just blow through there because it's straight. So bringing the curb in there or anywhere along Pascal or anything like that.
Yeah, we didn't really look at bringing curbs in, primarily because we wanted to use it for bike lanes where we had the extra width. And in other locations, like around the curbs and things downtown, sometimes you really need that extra width for a truck to be able to make the turn. So in most places, you're pretty narrow as it is, so the only place you're really not is Route 90. And again, that's a mobility corridor, so I don't think DOT would let us take much away, but I at least want to restripe it for narrower lanes.
Cool, thank you.
As long as we're doing wish lists, I would love to see Pascal become a no truck through traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Did the Route 1 and 90 intersection, so obviously that's going to become a park on the southwest side, east.
Southeast.
Did you take any of that into consideration as far as were there recommendations to the future park as far as how they could mitigate traffic or anything like that, or is that a whole separate kind of?
It's separate, but I'm leading that process, so it's overlapping in a good way. The park design process is still in the early phase. Sorry, the park design process is still in the early phase, but we're very open to opportunities to calm traffic along West Street, to introduce parking, to provide good access to the park. So here in this study, just making sure that we have the right width for that and the connectivity east to west for pedestrians is sort of the minimum that we're ensuring here, and then that gives us a great place to jump off from with the park. So there might be on-street parking, there might be the opportunity to take that 10-foot path and weave it into the site and introduce, park landscaping around it. So yeah, the two processes are really talking to each other.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
In sort of responding to Jan's wish list on no trucks on Pascal, I did want to indicate that the group has talked about the issue of how Rockport does become sort of a Route 1 bypass. And we have talked extensively with Sewell about that stop and go intersection, whether that can be a four-way stop. So it does, right now there's a huge disincentive to be on Route 1 in the summer. You want to go through Rockport. Every smart person knows to do that. It may happen that with the bridge construction and the work that happens with that will sort of start to create new patterns. But it is in the study, is what can be done with that, the intersection with Camden there.
Right. DOT did do a study last year. We've spoken to them several times and emailed. They have not made a decision. I mean, basically, they recommended always stop or a traffic signal would address the problem. I don't think Camden was very receptive, and it's our understanding that the project kind of stalled. But we're going to make a recommendation in this study that indeed, an always stop or a traffic signal get installed there. And their DOT is hoping that gets that project going again, because it's kind of stalled. So we are working on that.
So there were a couple of questions online.
Okay.
From William Levy. So I'm just going to kind of go right down the list. There's 4 questions listed. So does this proposed plan include addressing the storm drainage grates along Pascal Avenue? They are low, will cause hazards to the bikers.
I mean, if indeed they're low in a hazard, then they probably should be raised, yes.
And you'd want to check to make sure the grates are compliant with bicycle traffic, so you don't have bicycle tires going down into the catch basins. So
right.
That would come in the design phase, but yes, certainly.
So that would be in the design phase. It wouldn't necessarily be in this study.
Concept level,
That
right.
needs-
The
that's
concept
up to-
level wouldn't drill down to that level of detail, but absolutely that should be accounted for, yes.
Okay. All right, so the next question, will there be an RRFB, I don't know what that stands for, on the intersection of Elm and Pascal, and people use this crossing to get to Walker Park regularly?
We've got-
Would you read the question, please?
Sure. The question was, will there be an RRFB, which is a rectangular rapid
Yes,
flashing
that's-
beacon?
That's our recommendation,
Okay,
yes.
so yes.
That all those crossings on Pascal have them.
Okay. And then another question, are the proposed esplanades on Pascal going to be redone, or are you just showing this for sake of the plan?
The esplanades we're not redoing. It's pretty much to show where the existing is and where the green space is. So, yeah.
Plan clarity, I guess, is, yeah.
And then the last question, there's very few left turns except for the people that live down in Rockport Village. I guess it's a statement.
Probably southbound on Route 1, I'd
Probably
assume
when we
that's,
talked about
yeah.
southbound
Oh.
on Route 1, yeah.
Oh.
There are very few left turns, just a handful.
And that's all the questions online so far. So there's another question over here.
I have a question about these RRFBs. I was just wondering, do they click and beep and make
No,
all
no.
kinds of noises
No,
for the people
they're-
who live there?
These ones don't make noises, they just flash when they're activated and not all the time.
Thanks.
Unless you wanted that, I don't know if that's what.
For traffic signals it is. I don't believe it is for RRBs. For a traffic signal, they have to be audible. Bless you.
Just to change gears a little bit, you talked about parking and your survey, and you talked that it seemed like almost all the spaces when you were looking were filled up. How many spaces would this plan add? And overall, what is your impression of the parking situation in town? What can be done to address it, to make it feel like it's more comfortable to park here?
I mean, like we said, we were proposing the additional spaces on Mechanic Street. I'm not sure how many that is, maybe a dozen. We're looking for parking pockets in the park. I'm assuming that's probably at least another dozen spaces.
Sure, yeah, along the street.
At least, and then, do we have someplace else?
Formalizing the parking pockets along Pascal.
Pascal probably
Yeah.
wouldn't add any, but it would be a more formal parking arrangement.
You could tear down the hotel.
Yep.
So going into 2045, is this enough parking for a town, or do we need to reconsider our parking situation and add more parking?
Yeah, we did not project parking into 2045. That will depend a lot upon what your land use does. We just projected traffic volumes, which is what DOT requires us to use a 20-year out study year. So the traffic analysis was 2045, but parking, we're just looking at your current conditions, because we don't have a crystal ball as to what's going to happen down there.
So we have an opinion.
I think we saw that you could certainly use some more. It would make it easier for people to visit and shop, and and that's what we're trying to do in close proximity. There aren't a lot of I mean, you do have the park. Kramer Park's a great location to add it. My understanding is Marine Park was built with federal dollars that limit what you can do there, so you really can't add parking at that location. You have all the parking you can have in the Warfare area, I think, or the, harbor area. So you don't have a lot of other opportunities, so that's why we thought the Mechanic Street was an easy one, pretty close by, especially if you've got an Opera House event going on. It would be close proximity parking.
I wondered about the Franklin Street one-way. If that's a 16-foot travel lane, why couldn't you have a lane of parking on one side?
You could have a lane of parking, but what we found is then you couldn't also have a sidewalk to get those pedestrians down the street. So you'd have a travel lane, a parking lane, and then you really need a sidewalk, and it's just so narrow. Plus, you're parking on a very steep hill,
Yep.
which I'm not sure is recommended either.
Yeah, unless you're up on Church Street.
Unless you're in church, right.
I think there are some other things that we are looking at as a town in terms of parking that weren't part of this study.
Right.
We've got the boat storage area down below, and maybe there's some better ways to use that space for the benefit of the town. All things, we're very aware of the lack of parking.
Any other questions? Over here.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This is really interesting and encouraging. Wondering if you looked at the crosswalk that's literally right here coming to the library. I happen to sit in an office overlooking that crosswalk, and I see basically a quarter of the traffic doing a U-turn right over that crosswalk right now, especially since the hotel has been opened. I'm very concerned. I see a lot of kids walking from the downtown with musical instruments walking up the street and coming to the library. Because of the way the crosswalk sits and the way the parking is in front of the Opera House, it's very difficult for cars to see smaller, shorter people, and I see them almost hit quite frequently. So I'm just curious if you looked at sort of the angle of that crosswalk maybe, or maybe having one of those RRFBs there potentially.
Can you just describe the U-turn? I'm not entirely following how you're.
Well, it's not. I don't know if it's. I don't think it's a legal U-turn. I'm not sure. There's no signage, but people are doing a U-turn. They're coming up the street from downtown, up Central, and then they just do a U-turn and turn back around.
Go
It's
right
because
back down Central again.
They
probably want to park on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very common. Like extreme. Like everyone does it. It's really common, and because of that, if you're doing a U-turn. Which again, I think that should be considered if that's legal or not. There's no signage, so people assume it's legal. The U-turn has to be over the crosswalk, right where I see many, many children crossing. So just hoping you can consider that.
Yeah, we've looked at it some. It is longer than I would like it to be, and it is not necessarily the best. I mean, ideally, you'd want it to be swung more out towards Central Street for greater visibility, but that makes it even more angled, and you want them to be 90 degrees. So I have looked at it. I didn't think there was much I can do with it, but let's look at it some more. Maybe marking it with RFBs would be helpful.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
wondering. Cool, thank you.
Just definitely on that same topic, as a walker, coming from Russell Avenue past the library to cross over, the crosswalk is farther towards Central Street, so you go down the sidewalk towards Central Street and then cross back toward the library. Most of the time, I cross back here before you get to the parking spots on the side of the road by the library here, simply because it's narrower. I'm crossing less road. It feels safer. So I'd like to ask that maybe we look at the location as well as the angle of that in relationship. Now that I understand you have this 400 feet idea or rule from the DOT, you know, it's clearly two crosswalks there are not the answer, but you know, the way that the whole intersection is configured makes it really quite unsafe in one end and too far on the other end. So I don't know what the answer is, but there's something out there for us, and I just want to say that I'd like to think about that too.
Yeah, no, I've looked at it some, and it is not ideal, I agree, so we can look at it some more. It's, like I said, I would angle it more towards Central, but that would make it longer, which you don't want to do either. It's already long, but.
I'm curious if there's enough room to put a roundabout, like in front of the library. Right.
It was
why don't
pretty
we
much
just
that way
help 'em out?
before, right? Wasn't it pretty much a roundabout before almost? It was like a mini roundabout.
Can we put it
before,
back?
Right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
not, it got treated as a roundabout by people who didn't know how to.
But it really, yeah.
Because cars do come up Central, sorry. And if there's no parking, they do need to turn around to try and get parking on the other side of the road. And there's nothing that facilitates that. And then suddenly you're just on Union and there's no parking there. So it's, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about getting people to parking spaces, it seems like maybe we can help facilitate that.
I mean, a roundabout, it looks like you would have the space to do it, but you would lose all that green space and all that crosswalk space in front of the library. You would lose all of that in order to locate a roundabout there, which I'm not sure you want to do.
Yeah, and I think a roundabout's going to take up more space than you might expect as
Yeah.
well, even a single lane one. And then you would need to make sure to accommodate as much as you don't want truck traffic coming through here. There will be truck traffic coming through here, so that would need to accommodate that. So.
And then it gets more difficult for bikes and pedestrians sometimes too. So I'm not sure that's the answer, but we'll definitely look at that crosswalk.
So, one more thing that I feel like could become an issue is the big parking lot is going to be behind the hotel, and there's basically a one way in, one way out. I don't even know what that road would be.
It's Main Street? Main Street.
Is it-
It's
yeah.
Main Street.
It would be a different slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I worry that people are it's gonna become kind of a, let's go down here, check for parking, and then there's gonna be nothing, and they're gonna come back out. It's gonna be become a busy little corner there. And it's probably, the parking lot's not really open yet. So I don't know if it's probably not presenting any issues now, but I could see it in the future becoming a problem. Only because it's
That parking lot is private. That
It's just the,
Would be available.
oh, really, just for the
No,
hotel?
it's all owned by the hotel.
Yeah, how many, the hotel is not a lot of rooms, so it's not projected to have a lot of trips in peak hours. So although it will be more trips probably than using that lot now, it shouldn't be a very heavy
Yeah, I didn't realize
flow.
it was private, so I guess that's, yeah, probably not gonna be the big, yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for all your hard work and the committee's hard work. It's very much appreciated for the town.
Microphone, closer.
Yeah, it's very much appreciated, all your hard work. This is the first time I've ever spoken at a meeting in the entire time that I've lived here for 20 years. But I just think it's imperative that you just review again specifically how many crosswalks you have on Central and how many you have on Main, because it is, the running back and forth is quite severe. And I just want to understand why an additional sidewalk is being added on the other side of the bridge. Is that a DOT requirement, or is that just a request?
It is a request from the committee that
Yes.
there be another sidewalk there.
But could you just clarify as to the access then, so that, because there is continuous running back and forth on Central and Main. And as you went through your whole presentation, you really kind of didn't touch on anything in relationship to Main besides the fact that that added sidewalk, or that nothing else is changing, but there will be the access for handicap at the end. And so it would just be interesting, and to this gentleman's point, that the access to the Marine Harbor is and will be more of a congested area as the parking lot opens and traffic increases. So if you could just address those areas there, that would be helpful as far as crosswalks. Central, how many sidewalk crossings will you have, and their signification, and how many on Main?
So go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So there's the one at the end of Main, basically at the bridge at the handicapped ramp, and then the existing one on Central.
And that's it, just the two. So that's it?
Correct.
Okay, so the old one that used to exist right near Franklin Street, you will be taking that one away.
That one was taken away already by DOT.
And
It-
so when you come around Main Street, it is a blind curve for traffic, for pedestrian, for everyone. And so that crosswalk down Central is quite far, and doesn't have any recognition to find it, because with all the cars that are parked, you cannot see it. And to address that other, sorry, I don't know names, but another individual said about children, the children are never seen. You can't see them at all because of all the parked cars. So will you have a designation for the crosswalk on Central Street, like you will on Pascal?
We did not propose the RFBs downtown because there's usually so much going on in the downtown, but we are proposing that the parking be removed away from the crosswalk. Currently, it's very close, and that's actually against our manual on uniform traffic control devices. It requires that there no parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk. So we're proposing that that parking be pulled away from the crosswalk for greater visibility, but we were not proposing our RFBs at that crossing.
So will you have signage as to where your crosswalk is on Central, so that when we do have tourists?
Well, you're going to have sidewalks on both sides, so people can, they'll be on a sidewalk all the way, so that they'll walk their sidewalk until they come to a crosswalk. They won't necessarily,
Unfortunately, that does not happen now. Only possibly residents will abide by that, but beyond that, everyone just runs across the street at any point.
well, because there's no sidewalk to collect them, they have to run across the street now. If they park on the opposite side, they have no choice but to cross the street at that location. So if we give them a sidewalk to collect them, they should be able to go back to the crosswalk to cross.
I don't think I'm making myself clear, so I'll pass on the microphone and I'll.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joe. I live here in Rockport. The other thing, I don't know if it's possible to consider, is in many villages, I've seen raised sidewalks in the village area, and I would see that that might accomplish two things. It would be much more visible if there was a raised sidewalk, and it would likely also slow the traffic down.
Yep, absolutely. That would be a good location for a raised crosswalk. It usually creates a little bit of drainage concerns, especially on a hill, because you've got to basically locate catch basins on the upper side to collect it so you don't have big puddles, but that would be a great location for a raised crosswalk. And I think it's a great idea.
We got time for maybe one more question if anybody has one. All right, well, do you want to discuss next steps?
Yeah, next steps, we're going to go back and look at these few areas of concern. We are going to finalize the plans. We're going to bring them back to the committee, and they will review them, and then we'll create a final study report that the town will use to go forward, applying for hopefully DOT funds to accomplish a lot of these things.
And there's also a new survey to take.
Yes,
Right.
the new survey, it did go online
Yes,
today.
so the new survey, it's on the town website. If you go to projects, traffic infrastructure study, in there you will see a link to a new survay. So please
So
go
you
and
can
take it.
comment on all of these cross-sections and renderings and give us your feedback.
What is your timeline?
Timeline, we had originally proposed to be done by the middle of April, but we're not going to have that survey as quickly as we hoped of the lot next to Marine Park. So it may be more like May, but we'll be done this spring.
Springtime.
So to stay tuned on future progress, if you're not signed up for Civic Ready, sign up for Civic Ready. If you are, thank you. You can also pay attention to our website, onto that project page. That's where we'll post everything coming up, okay? Well, thank you, Sewell, and thank you, everybody, for attending.
I wish I understood her question better. I'd like to have her.
This was a quick sketch by Amy.